In the city of Chicago, Ted Miller, a desperate single father, makes the fateful decision to sell his daughter, Lily, to a ruthless human trafficker in search of easy money. Consumed by regret when he discovers that she has been handed over to an even more dangerous network, he finds himself forced to infiltrate the criminal underworld to try to save his daughter and redeem himself for his wrong choice. On his journey, he meets Maria, a mother who has experienced the same pain, and together they face challenges, traumas and revelations that will change their lives forever. Ted Miller sat at the edge of a worn-out couch in his small Chicago apartment, the fabric frayed from years of use. The dim light from a single bulb flickered overhead, casting shadows that danced across the cluttered room. Crumpled bills lay strewn across the coffee table, remnants of a life that had spiraled out of control. He rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of desperation pressing down on him like a heavy fog. His friend, Mark, shifted uncomfortably in the armchair opposite him, concern etched across his face. "Ted, you can't seriously be thinking about this. Selling Lily? There has to be another way." Ted's gaze hardened as he leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "What other way is there, Mark? I'm drowning here. I can't pay the rent, I can't buy her clothes, I can't even put food on the table. This is the only option I have left." Mark shook his head vehemently. "You're talking about your daughter. She's just a kid, Ted. You can't throw her away like that. I know things are tough, but there are resources, charities, shelters, people who can help you. But help takes time." Ted snapped, his voice rising. "Time that I don't have. I need cash now. You don't understand what it's like." He paused, his voice faltering. "I can't keep watching her suffer because I can't provide for her." Mark's expression softened, but he remained firm. "You think selling her will solve your problems? You have no idea who you're getting involved with. These people are dangerous. You could lose her for good." Ted's heart raced as he thought of Lily's smiling face, her laughter echoing in the empty hallways of their home. But the impending bills loomed larger in his mind, a monstrous shadow that threatened to swallow him whole. "What choice do I have?" he whispered, barely able to look Mark in the eye. As the weight of the conversation hung heavily in the air, Ted's phone buzzed on the table, interrupting the tension. He grabbed it, his heart racing as he saw the name on the screen. Victor. The man he had met just days prior, the one who had made him a dark offer that seemed to glimmer with the promise of relief. "Is that him?" Mark asked, narrowing his eyes. "You can't be serious about this." Ignoring his friend's protest, Ted swiped to answer. "Hello, Mr. Miller." Victor's voice dripped with a chilling calmness. "I trust you've had time to think about my proposal." Ted swallowed hard, his throat dry. I have. I'm ready to discuss it." "Good," Victor replied, a sinister smile evident in his tone. "Meet me tonight. We'll finalize the arrangements." After ending the call, Ted felt a mixture of fear and a dark sense of relief wash over him. Mark's expression was a cocktail of disbelief and worry. "You're really going through with this?" Ted took a deep breath, fighting the churning in his stomach. "I have to. I need to think about Lily's future." As the sun set outside, casting a pale orange glow through the grimy window, Ted's heart ached. He imagined Lily, her bright blue eyes sparkling with innocence, blissfully unaware of the darkness that loomed ahead. He had made his decision, but the thought of losing her gnawed at him. Later that night, Ted found himself standing in front of a seedy bar on the outskirts of the city, the neon sign flickering ominously. He hesitated for a moment, staring at the entrance as dread coiled tightly in his gut. But the memory of Lily's laughter pushed him forward, and he stepped inside, his heart pounding. Victor was waiting, seated at a dimly lit table. The moment their eyes met, Ted felt a chill run down his spine. The man exuded a dangerous charisma, confidence radiating in every movement. "You've arrived," Victor said smoothly, gesturing for Ted to sit. "I'm glad to see you're ready to make a deal." Ted sat down, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. "What's next?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. Victor leaned in, his gaze piercing. "We offer a fair price for your daughter. In return, you'll receive enough money to solve all your problems. Just think about it, no more late payments, no more struggling. You'll have freedom." Ted felt a wave of nausea wash over him. "And what happens to her?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor's lips curled into a smirk. "She'll be taken care of. She'll have a life better than you can provide. Trust me." Ted's heart raced. He looked away, wrestling with the gravity of his decision. But he could already feel himself slipping into the abyss, blinded by the promise of an escape. With a deep breath, he nodded. "I accept." 2 months had passed since Ted Miller made the agonizing choice that haunted him day and night. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his chest as he sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, the fading light of dusk casting long shadows across the room. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the incessant ticking of the clock on the wall, the only constant in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. Suddenly his phone rang, slicing through the silence like a knife. "Mr. Miller?" The voice on the other end was gruff, detached. "I have some news about your daughter." Ted's heart raced, a mix of dread and hope surging through him. "What is it? Is Lily okay?" His voice cracked, betraying the anxiety that clawed at him. There was a pause, and then the voice continued. She's disappeared. We don't know where she is. We're doing everything we can, but..." The words blurred together as despair washed over him. "What do you mean? How could this happen?" I gave her to you, he shouted, his voice rising in panic. Sir, you need to calm down. We're looking into it, but the network is vast. We need your cooperation. Ted felt as if the ground beneath him had crumbled away. He dropped the phone, his hands trembling as he sank into the nearest chair, his mind racing with the implications. How had he let this happen? The regret wrapped around him like a suffocating blanket. He had thought he was saving her from a life of poverty, but now he realized the depths of his folly. In a haze, he stumbled to the police station, desperation fueling his steps. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he approached the front desk, where an officer glanced up, his expression a mix of boredom and annoyance. I need to report a missing child, Ted stammered, his voice shaky. My daughter Lily, she was taken. The officer raised an eyebrow, his pen pausing mid-air. Name? Ted Miller. She was taken by a trafficking ring. Okay, Mr. Miller, we have protocols for this. Can you fill out these forms? The officer pushed a clipboard toward him, the impersonal action feeling like a slap in the face. Ted stared at the blank lines, his hands shaking. You don't understand. This isn't just another case. She's in danger. You have to help me. The officer sighed, glancing around as if searching for a way to escape the conversation. Look, we're stretched thin here. Human trafficking is a big issue and we don't have the resources, but you have to do something. Ted interrupted, frustration boiling over. I can't just sit here and wait. I need to find her. The officer looked up at him, finally meeting his eyes. Listen, we're aware of the networks operating in this area. It's not just a few bad guys. It's a whole system. You need to be careful. If you're involved with these people, they can turn on you in an instant. Ted nodded, the gravity of the situation settling in. He turned and left the station, the weight of the world pressing down on him. Days turned into weeks, and the despair that followed him felt like a dark cloud, unshakable and relentless. In his search for answers, he began to visit local support groups, places where parents gathered to share their stories of loss. It was a raw, painful experience, but Ted felt a strange sense of camaraderie with those who sat alongside him, their faces etched with grief. One evening, he found himself sitting in a small cafe, a group of weary parents exchanging whispered accounts of their children's disappearances. I don't know how to keep going, one mother admitted, her voice breaking. Every day feels like a lifetime. Ted listened, his heart aching for these parents who understood his pain. I just want to find her, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could save her, but now I don't know what to do. Another parent reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. You're not alone in this. We're all fighting the same battle. Don't lose hope. As Ted looked around the room, he saw the shared anguish reflected in their eyes. In that moment, he didn't feel as isolated in his regret. Instead, he felt a flicker of determination igniting within him. He had to keep searching. He had to find Lily not just for himself, but for all the parents who had lost their children to this insidious world. At a crowded parent-teacher meeting, the fluorescent lights flickered above the gathered parents, and the air buzzed with quiet conversations and nervous laughter. Ted Miller sat in the back, his heart heavy with the weight of guilt and regret. He had come to find answers and support, but all he could think about was his daughter, Lily, and the darkness that enveloped her since he made that unforgivable choice. As he glanced around, his eyes landed on a woman seated across the room, her expression mirroring his own turmoil. Maria, a mother with deep-set eyes and a haunted look, caught his gaze. The moment their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a connection born from shared pain. After the meeting adjourned, Ted mustered the courage to approach her. Hi, I'm Ted, he said, extending his hand, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria, she replied, shaking his hand firmly. I saw you in there. You looked lost. Ted nodded, his throat tightening. I am. My daughter? She's missing. I've been trying to find her for months now. Maria's expression softened. I understand. My son was taken last year. I've been searching ever since. The words hung in the air, heavy with sorrow. Ted felt a rush of empathy. What happened? He asked gently. They promised me answers, but they're all just dead ends. It's like shouting into a void. Every day, I wake up hoping it's just a nightmare, but it's not. I thought, Ted hesitated, the shame clawing at him. I thought selling her was the only way to fix things. Now I don't know if I'll ever see her again. Maria's eyes widened in disbelief. You sold her? You made that choice. I was desperate, he confessed, anguish spilling from his heart. I thought I could buy her back, that I could save her, but I was wrong. I can't live with myself. The guilt will eat you alive if you let it, Maria said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. We need to do something, together, for our kids. We can't just sit and wait. Ted felt a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. What do you suggest? Let's investigate. We can share what we know, gather information. There's bound to be something we can uncover about these traffickers, Maria proposed, determination flickering in her eyes. Okay, Ted agreed, his resolve strengthening. I'll do anything to find her. Over the next few weeks, the two parents became inseparable allies in a mission that felt more like a desperate quest than a plan. They exchanged phone numbers and met regularly, each meeting a blend of strategy sessions and shared grief. Their conversations turned into late-night phone calls, maps sprawled across tables littered with coffee cups and half-eaten sandwiches. One evening, as they sat in a dimly lit diner, Maria leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concentration. I've heard whispers about a network operating out of the south side. They're connected to the guy who took our kids. We need to dig deeper. Ted nodded, his heart racing. I've been talking to some people too. They mentioned a group that organizes underground auctions. It's horrific, but it might be our only lead. As they delved deeper into the investigation, the threats began to materialize. Ted received a chilling call one night as he and Maria reviewed their notes at her kitchen table. You need to stop looking for your children, the voice on the other end of the line growled, low and menacing. You're poking your nose where it doesn't belong. Ted's hand shook as he hung up, fear coursing through him. He shared the news with Maria, and they both sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of their situation sinking in. We can't back down now, Maria said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Our kids are depending on us. They'll come after us, Ted warned, his stomach churning with anxiety. We need to be careful. Maria nodded, determination etched on her face. I know it's dangerous, but we can't let fear paralyze us. We have to fight. As they plotted their next steps, Ted felt a mix of dread and hope. Together, they had become more than just two grieving parents. They were warriors, united in a cause that transcended their individual pain. The stakes were high, but so was their resolve. They would not rest until they uncovered the truth and brought their children home. The dimly lit bar exuded an air of danger, with shadows pooling in the corners and the low hum of conversation punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter. Ted Miller sat stiffly at a table in the back, his heart racing as he glanced around, acutely aware of the types of people surrounding him. The smell of cheap whiskey and sweat hung thick in the air, mingling with a sense of dread. Maria, seated across from him, was equally tense, her fingers tapping nervously against her glass. Are you sure this is the right place? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ted nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at him. This is where the gang hangs out. If we're going to find anything about Lily, we have to take risks. Maria sighed, her eyes darting to the rowdy group of men at the bar. I just hope we don't draw attention to ourselves. I don't want to end up like the others, Ted finished for her, the painful memory of missing children hanging heavy in the air. He took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising panic. Let's just stick to the plan. We listen, we gather information, and we get out. As they settled into an uneasy silence, Ted caught sight of a man he recognized from the reports, Victor, the trafficker who had initially deceived him. He was standing at the bar, his presence commanding respect and fear in equal measure. Ted's heart pounded louder in his chest as he whispered, "There's Victor. If anyone knows anything about the auction, it'll be him." "Are you out of your mind?" Maria hissed, her eyes wide with alarm. "We can't just approach him. We need to know," Ted insisted, determination hardening his tone. "I'll do the talking. Just keep an eye out for anyone suspicious." With a nod of reluctant agreement, Maria leaned back in her chair, her gaze trained on the bar. Ted rose slowly, trying to appear casual as he made his way toward Victor. The closer he got, the more the atmosphere seemed to thicken, as if the very air was charged with tension. "Victor," Ted said, forcing his voice to remain steady as he approached the trafficker. "We need to talk." Victor turned, his expression shifting from mild surprise to a predatory grin. "Well, if it isn't the desperate father. I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm not here for games," Ted shot back, his voice low. "I need information. There's talk of an auction. I want in." Victor studied him for a moment, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you're not ready for what's coming. This isn't just a simple auction, it's a whole other world." "I can handle it," Ted replied, anger and desperation fueling his words. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to find my daughter." Victor leaned in closer, his breath hot and rancid. "You think you can just waltz into this world and come out unscathed? You have no idea what you're up against." He paused, savoring Ted's discomfort. "But I do have a job for you. If you really want in, you'll need to prove yourself first." Ted clenched his fists, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "I'm not here to do your dirty work. I want to know about the auction." With a chuckle, Victor straightened up. "Fine, but you'll have to earn your keep. Word is, there's an auction happening soon. A lot of valuable merchandise on the line." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "But I can't promise you'll find your daughter there." Ted's heart sank, but he forced himself to remain composed. "I need to know where it is." Victor smirked, clearly relishing Ted's desperation. "You'll have to come back with something of value. Information, a favor, something to make it worth my while." As Ted walked back to Maria, his mind reeled with the implications of what Victor had said. He mentioned an auction, he said, urgency in his voice. "But we need to find something to bargain with. We can't go in empty-handed." Maria's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. "If we can gather more intel about the gangs, we can leverage that against Victor," Ted finished, a plan beginning to form. They exchanged determined looks, the weight of their shared mission hanging in the air. The fear that had gripped them earlier was now coupled with a renewed sense of purpose. As they prepared to leave the bar, Ted felt a strange connection growing between them, a bond forged through shared pain and desperation. But beneath that connection lay an undercurrent of tension, each of them wrestling with their own fears and traumas. "Let's just be careful," Maria said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying her concern. "We're in deeper than we ever planned." "Together," Ted replied, affirming their alliance, even as doubt lingered in the corners of his mind. They stepped out of the bar and into the night, ready to confront the shadows that loomed ahead. Ted sat across from Maria at a small table in a dimly lit cafe, the weight of their shared mission heavy in the air. The flickering candle between them cast shadows on their faces, mirroring the uncertainty they felt about the plan they were about to execute. "We need to be strategic about this raid," Ted said, his voice low. "If we rush in without a solid plan, we could end up getting ourselves killed." Maria nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I agree. But we can't afford to wait too long either. Every moment we hesitate could mean another lost opportunity to find our kids." Ted leaned back, his mind racing. Ever since he had linked up with Maria, they had been piecing together a timeline of Lily's disappearance, and the illegal auction was their best lead yet. How do we even know where this auction will take place? It could be anywhere. Maria looked at him, determination shining in her eyes. "I have a contact who might know. He's been in the underground scene for a while and can give us some intel on where they usually operate." He raised an eyebrow. "You trust this guy?" "I have to. It's a risk we need to take." She took a deep breath, trying to steady the nerves that threatened to spill over. "Are you ready to do this?" Ted nodded, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. "For Lily, I'll do whatever it takes." As they finalized their plans, Ted's phone buzzed unexpectedly. He glanced down and frowned at the unknown number flashing on the screen. He hesitated but then answered, his voice steady despite the apprehension. "Hello, Mr. Miller," a distorted voice crackled through the line. "You're getting closer to the truth, but be careful. The dealer you're looking into has connections, powerful connections. You need to tread lightly if you want to keep your life and that of your little girl." Ted's stomach churned. "Who is this?" But the line went dead, leaving only the soft hum of the cafe in the background. He looked up at Maria, dread pooling in his chest. "I just got an anonymous warning about the dealer. They said he has powerful connections." Maria's face paled and she leaned closer. "What did they say exactly?" "They didn't give any details, just that we need to be careful," he replied, the weight of the message settling heavily between them. "But we can't back down now. We're too close." "Then we need to find out who these connections are," Maria replied, her voice resolute. "If we can uncover that, we might be able to expose the whole network." "Right," Ted said, determination flaring within him. "I'll start digging into any leads I can find. We need to know who we're dealing with." The two spent the next few hours combing through public records and online databases, piecing together information that felt like a jigsaw puzzle. Ted was relentless, fueled by the desperate need to find Lily and right the wrongs of his past. "Look at this," Maria exclaimed, pointing to her laptop screen. "This dealer has a connection to a local politician. It's all here in the campaign finance records. It seems he's been funneling money through various businesses." Ted's heart raced as he leaned closer. "This could be huge. If we can expose this politician, it might lead us right to Lily. Or it could put us in even greater danger," Maria cautioned, her voice laced with concern. "We need to be smart about how we approach this." "Smart is what we need to be," Ted agreed, feeling the weight of their responsibility. "But we can't let fear stop us. We owe it to our children." As the night wore on, they forged a plan to gather more information about the politicians' connections, knowing that each step they took could lead them closer to the truth or deeper into peril. Ted felt a spark of hope igniting inside him, tempered by the reality of the risks they faced. With every passing moment, the stakes grew higher, and the resolve to save their children became a shared mission that bound them together. The cold Chicago night wrapped around Ted and Maria like a shroud as they crouched behind a dilapidated warehouse. The air was thick with tension, and the faint sounds of laughter and music drifted from the building ahead, a stark contrast to the looming danger of their mission. They had spent weeks gathering information, and now, the moment of truth had finally arrived. A safe house, a rumored prison for children caught in the web of trafficking, lay just beyond those walls. "Are you sure about this?" Maria whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant bass of the music. Her eyes, usually filled with determination, flickered with doubt. Ted glanced at her, his heart heavy with the weight of their shared pain. "We have to do this, Maria. For our kids. For Lily." He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. "We can't let fear hold us back anymore." Maria nodded slowly, the fire of their shared purpose igniting once more. "Right. We stick to the plan. Get in, find the kids, and get out. No heroics." "Agreed," Ted said, gripping the flashlight tightly. "Let's move." They crept toward the entrance, shadows flitting against the worn brick walls. The door was slightly ajar, and Ted pushed it open gently, the creak of the hinges sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The air was damp and stale, permeated with the smell of fear and despair. They stepped cautiously, their senses heightened, listening intently for any signs of life. "Over there," Maria whispered, pointing to a hallway that stretched into darkness. "I heard some voices." Ted nodded, and they cautiously made their way down the corridor, hearts pounding in their chests. As they approached the end, the muffled sounds of laughter and chatter grew louder. They pressed against the wall, peering around the corner. The sight that met their eyes sent a chill down Ted's spine. A group of men, tattooed and menacing, lounged around a makeshift poker table, a pile of cash stacked in the center. The walls were adorned with crude graffiti, and the atmosphere radiated danger. But more importantly, Ted noticed the door at the far end, slightly ajar. He could hear faint cries echoing from within. "Those must be the children," Maria murmured, her voice trembling slightly. "We have to get them out." "Let's create a diversion," Ted suggested, his mind racing. "I can throw something to distract them." "Do you have anything?" Maria asked, scanning the area for potential tools. Ted reached into his pocket and pulled out a small rock he had picked up earlier. "This will have to do." He took a deep breath, his pulse quickening. "On three. Ready?" Maria nodded, her eyes filled with resolve. 1, 2, 3. Ted hurled the rock down the hallway, and it clattered against the floor, drawing the men's attention. "What the hell was that?" one of them barked, standing up. The group turned, eyes narrowing as they moved to investigate. "Now," Ted hissed, leading Maria toward the door. They slipped through the opening, hearts racing. Inside, the sight was devastating. Rows of small, frightened faces stared back at them, their eyes wide with fear. Ted's breath hitched in his throat. "Lily," he called, panic coursing through him. "Shoo," Maria urged, her hand on his arm. "We need to be quiet." "Are you going to help us?" A small voice piped up from the shadows. A girl, no older than 8, stepped forward, her eyes filled with hope. "Yes, we're here to get you out," Ted reassured her, kneeling to her level. "But we need you all to be very quiet, okay?" As they began to usher the children toward the door, the sound of shouts erupted from the hallway. "They're in here. Get them. Run." Maria shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. They pushed the children forward, adrenaline fueling their every move. Ted felt a surge of protective instinct as he ushered the last child out, his heart pounding like a drum. But then, just as they were about to escape, the door swung open and a gang member charged in, gun raised. "Not so fast," he yelled. "No," Ted shouted, instinctively stepping in front of the children. The world seemed to slow as he faced the man, fear and determination clashing within him. "Get out of the way," Maria yelled, stepping forward, her eyes fierce. "We're not leaving without these kids." The standoff was electric, the air thick with tension. But before any shots could be fired, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Ted turned just in time to see the group of men from the poker table spilling into the room. Panic surged through him. They had to get out. They had to save Lily. Without thinking, he grabbed Maria's hand and pulled her and the children toward a window at the far side of the room. "The only way out." "Jump," he urged as they reached the window. The glass shattered as they pushed through, landing on the grass outside. Ted glanced back, heart racing, hoping against hope that they would make it. In that moment, he vowed to himself that he would find Lily no matter the cost. The fight was far from over. Ted and Maria sat in the dim light of a small, nondescript motel room, the weight of their shared mission hanging heavily in the air. The walls, stained and peeling, seemed to echo their unspoken fears. A flickering overhead light cast intermittent shadows that danced across their faces, making the silence feel even more oppressive. Ted rubbed his temples, trying to push away the anxiety that gnawed at him. He glanced at Maria, who was staring blankly at the wall, lost in her thoughts. "Do you think we'll find them?" Ted finally broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting their hopes and fears. Maria turned to him, her eyes reflecting both determination and pain. "We have to believe we will, Ted. For the kids." "For Lily," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "We can't let fear control us." Ted nodded, though doubt still lingered in his heart. I can't shake this feeling that we're running out of time. What if we're too late?" Maria leaned forward, her expression fierce. "We won't be. We're closer than we've ever been. We've already rescued some kids, and that's a start. We can't give up now." She reached out and placed her hand over his, a gesture of solidarity amidst the chaos of their lives. But as the night wore on, the shadows of their past haunted them. Ted found himself lost in memories of better days, when Lily's laughter filled their home and the world seemed brighter. The thought of her innocence being taken from her shattered his heart anew. "I keep replaying that day in my mind," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I thought I was doing it for her. I thought I was saving her from a life of suffering, and now—" "Stop it," Maria interrupted, her tone firm yet compassionate. "You did what you thought was best at the time. You were desperate. We both were. But now we have a chance to make it right." Ted looked into her eyes, searching for the strength he desperately needed. "How do we keep going? I feel like I'm losing my mind. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face, and I don't know if I'll ever get her back." A silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of their grief. Maria took a deep breath, her resolve evident. "We keep going because we owe it to them. We owe it to Lily. She needs us now more than ever." As if on cue, Ted's phone buzzed on the table, breaking the tension. He grabbed it quickly, a surge of hope flooding through him. But when he saw the caller ID, that hope dissipated. It was an unknown number. "What if it's bad news?" he muttered, the anxiety evident in his voice. "Answer it," Maria urged, leaning closer, her eyes locked on his. With trembling fingers, Ted answered the call. "Hello?" he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Ted Miller?" The voice on the other end was distorted, as if deliberately masked. "You're looking for your daughter, are you?" His heart raced. "Who is this?" Ted demanded, anger and fear intertwining. "Let's just say I have information. You should listen closely. Lily's in danger, and your time is running out. The line went dead, leaving Ted holding the phone as if it were a ticking bomb. What the hell was that? He exclaimed, his heart pounding in his chest. Do you think it was real? Maria asked, her face a mix of concern and determination. We need to act on this. We can't wait any longer. Ted looked at her, desperation clawing at his insides. But what if it was just a trap? What if they're playing with us? Maria squeezed his hand tighter. We can't let fear hold us back. We owe it to Lily to take a risk. We'll figure it out together. As they sat in the dim light, the flickering overhead bulb casting a wavering glow on their determined faces, Ted felt a spark of resolve ignite within him. They had a chance, however slim, and he would not waste it. Okay, he said, his voice firm. Let's plan our next move. We'll find her, Maria. We have to. In that moment, amidst the shadows and uncertainty, they forged an unbreakable bond. Their shared pain became a driving force, propelling them forward into the darkness, ready to confront whatever lay ahead for the sake of their children. The pulsating bass of the music reverberated through the dimly lit room, casting erratic shadows on the faces of the partygoers. Ted and Maria stood near the bar, their hearts racing beneath the guise of casual indifference. They had donned their disguises carefully, Ted in a nondescript t-shirt and jeans, Maria in a fitted black dress that hid a small knife in her thigh holster. They knew the stakes were high. Every corner of the room could hide a threat. Are you sure we should be here? Maria whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaotic noise. She scanned the crowd, taking note of the gang members mingling with the affluent elite, their laughter mingling with the sound of clinking glasses. We need to find out what Victor knows, Ted replied, his eyes narrowing as he searched the room for any sign of the trafficker. If we can get to him, we might learn where they're keeping the kids. Just remember, Ted, Maria cautioned, her gaze steady. This isn't just a party, it's a den of wolves. Stay sharp. Just then, Ted spotted Victor across the room, leaning against the bar with an arrogant smirk plastered on his face. He was surrounded by a few men who looked equally dangerous, their eyes flickering over the crowd like predators on the hunt. Ted felt his stomach churn. This was the man who had taken Lily, and now he was laughing and drinking as if he owned the night. Let's move closer, Ted said, gripping Maria's arm gently. She nodded, and together they pushed through the throng of bodies, the noise enveloping them like a thick fog. Each step felt heavier, as if they were walking deeper into a trap. As they approached the bar, Ted leaned on the counter, pretending to order a drink. He could hear Victor's voice over the din, smooth and commanding. I don't care what it takes. We'll have our shipment ready by next week. No mistakes this time, he boasted, drawing the attention of his companions. Ted's heart raced. Shipment? He murmured to Maria. What does that mean? Shoo, she replied, her eyes darting to Victor. Listen, Victor continued, a smug grin on his face. The buyers are getting more impatient. They want the best, and they're willing to pay top dollar. We've got a few prime pieces lined up for the auction, he said, his tone dripping with satisfaction. Those kids won't know what hit them. A chill ran down Ted's spine. They were talking about the auction. His mind raced, desperate to hold on to the information. He knew he had to confront Victor, to demand answers, but fear gnawed at him. This was not just about him anymore, it was about Lily. Maria leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear. Are you ready, Ted? Ready as I'll ever be, he replied, steeling himself. Just keep your eyes open. With a determined stride, Ted approached Victor, forcing his way through the crowd. Victor, he called out, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Victor turned, surprise flashing in his eyes before it was replaced by amusement. Well, if it isn't the desperate father. What do you want, Ted? Come to beg for your daughter back? His laughter was cold, and it sent a shiver down Ted's spine. Where is she? Ted demanded, his voice steady, masking the turmoil within. What have you done with Lily? Victor leaned back, his expression shifting to one of mockery. You really think you can just waltz in here and demand answers? You made your choice, remember? You sold her. I regret that decision every day, Ted shot back, his fists clenching at his sides. But I won't stop until I find her. Tell me where she is. Victor's smile widened, a cruel glint in his eyes. You want to know where she is? You'll have to do better than that. Maybe you should think about your own safety first. After all, the people you're dealing with are not exactly forgiving. Who's the buyer? Maria interjected, stepping beside Ted, her demeanor fierce. We know you're involved with more than just petty trafficking. Who's behind this? Victor's expression darkened at her boldness. You're barking up the wrong tree, sweetheart. You have no idea who you're messing with. But I'll give you a hint. The buyer has connections that even I envy. Ted's heart sank. The mention of a powerful buyer sent a wave of dread through him. It was one thing to deal with a trafficker like Victor, but a buyer with connections could mean Lily was in even more danger than he had feared. Tell us, Ted pressed, desperation creeping into his voice. Please. Victor leaned in closer, his voice a low hiss. You're in over your head, Ted, but if you really want to find her, you need to come to the auction. I suggest you bring your best game because it's going to be a bloodbath, and you might just find what you're looking for, or lose everything." With that, Victor stepped back, a smirk still plastered on his face. The moment felt suffocating, and Ted felt the walls closing in. He and Maria exchanged a look, the weight of the information sinking in. "Let's get out of here," Maria urged, her eyes scanning the room. "We need to figure out our next move." As they slipped away from the bar, Ted's mind churned with the implications of what Victor had said. The auction was their last hope, but it came with a terrifying risk, and as they made their way through the crowd, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the danger was far from over. Ted sat in the dim light of his apartment, the weight of desperation pressing down on him like a heavy shroud. He gripped the phone tightly, his knuckles turning white as the realization of Lily's fate began to settle in his mind. Just hours before, he had stumbled upon a lead that sent chills down his spine, a connection between Victor, the trafficker he had dealt with, and an influential politician named Marcus Holt. The implications were staggering, and the thought that a man in power could be complicit in such heinous acts left him feeling sick to his stomach. "Maria," he said, his voice barely above a whisper as he dialed her number. The phone rang, and he could hear the distant sound of her answering machine pick up. "I need you to call me back. It's urgent." He hung up, his heart racing. Moments later, the phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Maria. "Ted, what's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "I found something," he said, his voice trembling. "Lily's buyer. It's Marcus Holt. He's involved in everything. The trafficking, the corruption. He's at the center of it all." There was a long pause on the other end before Maria replied, her voice steady but filled with worry. "Are you sure? This could be dangerous, Ted." "I know it is, but we can't let this go. If we expose him, maybe we can save the kids. Maybe we can save Lily." Maria sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of their grim reality. "We need to be careful. Holt is powerful, and if he finds out we're onto him, he'll come after us," Ted finished for her. "But we can't back down now. We owe it to our kids." They spent the next hour strategizing, poring over every piece of information they had gathered. Ted's mind raced as he recalled details from their previous encounters with Victor and the gang. "If we can get proof of Holt's involvement, we can take it to the press. But we need something solid, something he can't wiggle out of," Ted insisted, pacing the room. "Maybe we can set up a meeting," Maria suggested. "If we can get him to talk, we might catch him off guard." "Do you really think he'll meet with us?" Ted asked, skepticism creeping into his voice. "Why not? He thinks he's untouchable. We can pose as concerned citizens, maybe even leverage our own stories. The traffickers are desperate, they might see us as useful." Ted nodded slowly, the plan taking shape in his mind. "All right, but we need to be careful. If he gets even a hint that we're onto him, he'll bury us," Maria finished again, the weight of their situation settling between them. As they hung up, Ted's heart raced. He felt the pressure of time closing in on him, and with every passing moment, he feared for Lily's safety. He knew they had to move quickly, but the thought of confronting a man like Holt made his stomach churn. The next day, Ted and Maria arranged to meet under the guise of a concerned parents group where they would have a chance to approach Holt. The air was thick with tension as they entered the upscale restaurant where the meeting was set to take place. "Stay calm," Maria whispered to Ted as they scanned the room for Holt. "We can do this. Just remember what we're after." "Yeah, just remember what we're after," Ted muttered, feeling a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. At that moment, Holt entered the restaurant, a confident smile plastered on his face as he shook hands with patrons. Ted's breath hitched in his throat. The man exuded power and charm, but beneath that facade, Ted knew there was darkness lurking. "Let's go," Maria urged, steering him toward their target. As they approached, Holt turned his attention to them, his smile widening. "Ah, you must be the parents I've heard so much about," Holt said, his voice smooth like silk. "How can I help you?" Ted swallowed hard, forcing himself to maintain eye contact. "We're concerned about the increase in missing children. We wanted to know if there's anything your office is doing to help." Holt's smile faltered for just a moment, then returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course we're doing everything we can. It's a tragic situation, but we're working on it." "Are you?" Ted pressed, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "Because it feels like there's a lot more happening than what's being reported." Holt's gaze sharpened, and for a split second, Ted thought he saw a flicker of something darker behind the politician's mask. "I assure you we take these matters very seriously, but sometimes things are more complicated than they appear." With that, Ted felt a surge of adrenaline. This was their chance, but it was also a dangerous game. The tension in the air was palpable, and Ted could feel the stakes rising. "Then we need to know what's really going on. If there are people involved, powerful people." As Ted spoke, a chill ran down his spine. He understood the risk, but the thought of Lily being sold to the highest bidder fueled his determination. They had to expose Holt no matter the cost. "Let's talk somewhere private," Holt suggested, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I think we can help each other." Ted exchanged a glance with Maria, a silent agreement passing between them. They were in too deep now. As they followed Holt into the back of the restaurant, Ted felt the weight of their decision settle heavily on his shoulders. It was now or never. The truth was within reach, but they had to tread carefully. Danger awaited at every turn, and they were closer to the edge than ever before. Ted felt the weight of the world pressing down on him as he stood in front of the imposing glass building that housed the politician, a man whose public persona was that of a benevolent leader but whose true nature was steeped in corruption. Adrenaline coursed through his veins as he clutched the phone that had led him here, the voice on the other end cold and threatening. "If you want to see your daughter again, you need to act fast," the caller had said, the words echoing in his mind like a relentless drumbeat. With a deep breath, he stepped inside, the polished marble floors reflecting the light from the chandeliers above. He approached the receptionist, his heart racing. "I need to see Senator Johnson. It's urgent," he stated, trying to keep his voice steady. The receptionist glanced up, her eyes narrowing as she assessed him. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone dismissive. "No, but it's a matter of life and death." Ted's desperation seeped through his words, and the receptionist hesitated, sensing the gravity of his plea. After a moment, she picked up the phone, whispering into the receiver. Moments later, Ted was led through a labyrinth of hallways, the air thick with the scent of power and deceit. Finally, he found himself in a dimly lit office, where Senator Johnson sat behind a large oak desk, his demeanor calm and collected. He looked up, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Ah, Mr. Miller, I've been expecting you. Please have a seat." Ted stood his ground, his fists clenched at his sides. "I want to know where Lily is," he demanded, his voice low but fierce. The senator leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, his gaze unwavering. "You're in quite a predicament, Ted. You see, your daughter is in a facility that isn't exactly open to the public. But I can help you, if you're willing to make a trade." "What kind of trade?" Ted asked warily, his instincts screaming that he was walking into a trap. "I need you to do something for me. There's a particular group that's been causing me trouble. If you can eliminate them for me, I'll give you the location of your daughter." The senator's voice dripped with manipulation, and Ted felt a surge of anger rise within him. "You think I'd do your dirty work? You're the reason she's in danger." Ted shot back, his rage boiling over. Johnson's expression remained unchanged, as if Ted's fury was merely an inconvenience. "Think about it, Ted. You have a choice. Your life or your daughter's. I can make sure you're both safe if you cooperate." For a moment, Ted's mind raced. He was caught between a rock and a hard place, but he couldn't let this man dictate the terms of his daughter's life. Just then, a familiar voice echoed in his mind, the calming presence of Maria, who had stood by him through this ordeal. He remembered her words, "We fight together no matter how dark it gets." "Fine," Ted said suddenly, his resolve hardening. "But if I do this, you tell me everything about Lily. No more games." The senator's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Deal. But be careful, Ted. You're stepping into a dangerous world." As Ted left the office, a sense of dread settled over him. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but he had little choice. He had to find Lily. Later that evening, they met in a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of town, a place that felt like a refuge from the chaos. Maria looked at him, concern etched across her features. "What did he say?" "He knows where she is," Ted replied, his voice taut with tension. "But I have to do something for him first. I can't let him put her in danger. Don't you see? This is a trap, Ted. He's manipulating you." Maria's eyes bore into his, a mix of fear and determination. "I can't just sit back and wait. I need to act," he replied, his voice rising slightly. "Then let me help," she insisted, reaching across the table to take his hand. "We can find another way." "But you can't trust him." Ted opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. In that moment, Maria's grip on his hand tightened, and her expression shifted. "There's something I haven't told you. I've been undercover. I've been gathering evidence against this network for months." His heart raced, and a wave of realization washed over him. "You knew all along?" he asked, disbelief mingling with anger. "I had to make sure you were ready for this fight, Ted. I needed to know you wouldn't let fear consume you," she said softly, her eyes pleading for understanding. The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy and charged. "So what now?" Ted asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now we take the fight to them, together. I know how to navigate this world," she said, the determination in her voice igniting a flicker of hope in Ted's heart. He nodded, the weight of his despair lifting ever so slightly. "Let's do this, for Lily."